So today we're going to take a look at the ASPxHtmlEditor. Now this is a fantastic control if you want to create some way for you to let your users enter in information from an HTML source or even Word, Microsoft Word. So today we're going to take a look at how to basically drop it onto a form and some of its customization features such as custom toolbars. So let's get started. Now I'm just going to start right away with a new project, an ASP.NET project. And I'll use .NET Framework 4, and we'll just call this ASPxHtmlEditor demo. Now while that's getting created, I will give you some of the background of the HTML editor. So the HTML editor allows you to enable rich text editing. Essentially, anything that you have that's rich text that includes fonts and styles and so forth. And it's a full WYSIWYG editor, so it supports everything that, well, just about everything that you're used to in Microsoft Word. Because this is not a Win32 environment, we try to bring in everything in terms of keyboards and toolbars and so forth, look and feel from Word to put it on the website. So to get started, we're going to get rid of some of this stuff. Let's go to the design view here. Now let's change the message here. And we will change out this thing, and we'll drop an HTML editor here. Now the ASPxHtmlEditor you'll find under the DX 10.2, or whichever version you're using, Common Controls. So here it is. If you double click on it, it'll drop you to wherever the status was last. And while it gets added, you saw that references are being added. The web config also gets updated. So a whole bunch of little things happens that allows it to add our ASPxHTTP handler, which makes it easier to deliver themes and put in performance improvements. So at this point, you have everything you need to use this HTML editor. So for example, now I can run it. So I'm going to run it without debugging. Runs a little bit faster. And while that's compiling, we can see that it launches our little thing here. Now, the HTML editor has also been around for a couple of years, so we've optimized the heck out of it. So every little thing that you see in terms of the HTML source code here, let's just take a quick look at it here, has been optimized to work across all the major browsers, including Safari on Mac and Firefox and Mozilla, you name it. So, and IE6 as well. And let us, so the first thing you'll notice is, let me just go through some of the highlights of the HTML editor. So the HTML editor by default comes in parts. You have the toolbar area, and in the design view, you'll see that we have three default views here. That this is the design area, and finally the bottom area is called the status area. Now, the toolbar area, you'll see, looks very familiar to what you've seen in Microsoft Word. So you have things like cut, copy, paste, and we have a special button here as well called paste from Word. Now, these in the toolbar, these buttons are known as toolbar buttons. And there's two types of items basically in the toolbar. You have toolbar buttons and you have toolbar editors. The editors are these drop downs. And as I'll show you a little bit later, you have options to add your own versions of these. So, as I mentioned, you have the common buttons like cut, copy, and paste. You also have undo, redo, and you also have the remove format. So if you paste, let's say, from Word, and there's a format you don't like, you can remove it using this button. And we also have the superscript, which allows you to add a little 2 next to, let's say, x and give it x squared, or a subscript. We also have a ordered list and a bullet list, as well as indent and outdent. And We also give you the insert link. Now this is very, if you, as I mentioned, use Word, it's very similar to it, so it allows you to link to a file on your web server or an external file, or if you want, even an image. Now, the fantastic thing about the HTML editor is each of these things that I mentioned here has their own dialogue. So for example, the paste from Word will actually bring up a custom dialogue that allows you to paste some text in here from Microsoft Word. So let me see if we can find some text in my local drive here. Okay, don't see a Word document, so I will have to hunt one down. Okay, so let's say I will copy it from a different source here. Give me 1 minute here. Okay, here we go. Here's a white paper on asynchronous in .NET. And that was written by Mads Torgensen, who Mark Nord recently interviewed. It's good. It's a good video. It's worth watching. So let's go to my worksheet box here and open this up. So let's say I'll take some of this code here. Some of this text, rich text from Microsoft Word, and we'll just paste it directly into Microsoft Word here. Now we have the option to keep the font families and so forth, or strip them out altogether. So I'm actually going to strip out the font family because I don't want a lot of the items from Word. Instead, what I would like to do is use my own formatting. So for example, let's say I wanted to bold this. So I can highlight it, click the bold, change the font size, and even change to a different font. So let's say I'll go with Tahoma. And if we wanted, we can even change the coloring so that this allows us to change the back color of the fonts, and this allows us to change the forecolor. Now, as you saw, you can even change out the specific header tag. So right now this is set for a normal, but I can change this to a heading 2 to give it a much larger look and feel, but that doesn't quite look right, so let's change it back to normal. Now, let's say I also wanted to make Mads a link. So I can click here and say insert link, and automatically you'll see it picked up the text that I highlighted and can give it a tooltip. So I can say something like C# lang, say .NET language guru, and I can choose an option to open it in a new window, and I'll put in Microsoft.com/Mads, although I'm not sure that's actually a working email, so let's just leave it to Microsoft.com. And now I'll select OK. Now, as you saw, I can also make this an email address, but I'll leave it just as a link. Now, there we saw the basics of how to get up and running. As you see, it's a powerful editor, and everything you need has been instantiated for you, so you don't have to try to figure out, well, how do I add this, and how do I add this feature and that feature, all the basics that you're used to from Word. Now, one of the more powerful features we've added in more recent versions is a couple of features for imaging, tables, and this feature. This is the full screen feature. Now, one of the things you're probably thinking is, wow, this is great. I can use it as an editor. But wouldn't it be great if I had more real estate to work in? Well, that's what this allows you to do. This is a full screen button. So when I click it, you see that it expanded and took over. So if I actually expanded my browser to full screen and hit F11 to go full screen even more, now when I go full screen here, I actually go all the way over to the boundaries of my browser. Now if I hit escape, or actually if I hit this F11 button again, I'll go back to this boundaries of the HTML editor that we defined. Now, we've also added the tables button. So let me actually move some of this text into a table. So if I move my mouse over this, the drop-down comes out to insert a table. Now, if I was within a table, some of these other options would be highlighted, which would allow me to do things like set the row properties, or insert a row, or split it, and so forth. So let's insert a table here. Now, you'll see that you can define the table by its columns, its rows, its width, height, layout, and even appearance. So I'm just going to choose a small 2x2 column table, and we'll start moving some of this stuff here. Now, you'll notice that the keyboard shortcuts also work. So if I hit Control X and Control V, we also get that in there. So let's move some of this more simpler text here. And I'll add this here, and here I'll put in some title. So actually, let's say I don't even want 2 rows or 2 columns. What I can do is I can merge it with the column on the right. Now, I'm going to do the same thing up here, but I'll give it a title first, just as Matt's white paper. Oops. Now, I can right-click again here and say merge right. Now, I can set this up a little bit better by centering it, and once again, changing its font size and giving it a bold. Now, as you saw, this table editor is very powerful, and there are several dialogues that come with it. So, for example, if I wanted to look at the row properties, you'll have a special dialog just that allows you to set up the individual row properties. Now, one key thing to mention is that you may have noticed that some of the dialogues don't look right. So, for example, if you notice that the rounded corners are off here, well, this is because at DevExpress, we are XHTML 1.0 compliant, which means it gives us the capability to go cross-browser. And Microsoft in Visual Studio 2010 does something a little bit unusual, which is why we haven't actually addressed it directly, because it looks like they may change it. So the thing that happens is when you first created a sample project, a blank project on ASP.NET, and when Microsoft creates a site master page, they use the strict tag. Now, right now, we don't support the strict tag. We support the transitional. So it's important to add the transitional. So the easiest way to do it is just select the strict and remove it and put the transitional. Now, you might be wondering, well, where do you find the transitional? The easiest way I can tell you is to simply go to our demo site. So you can get there by going to demos.devexpress.com and go to any of the demos. So, for example, here I'm at the HTML editor demo. And if you right-click here and look at the page source, at the very top will be the doc type that you need. So just copy that, go back to Visual Studio, and I'll paste this in here. So now you see that we have the transitional. Now, let's save this, and let's run it again. Now, I mentioned they do something unusual because one of the things that happens is on the site master page they use strict. However, if you add a custom page, they don't use strict. They use transitional. Let's close this. And let's go back to that view here. So, as you can see now, when I click this, any of the dialogues, it should show us the properly rendered dialogue. Okay, so let's use Word here, for example. Oops, that doesn't actually have any rounded corners, so let's use the image dialog here. And you can see now that our properly rendered items are displaying correctly. So as I mentioned, one of the reasons we haven't fixed this is because it seems like that there isn't a real consistency, and we have some plans that we have mentioned about things that are coming out in 2011. So, right now the easiest way is to simply change that doc type if you have any issues with rendering with Visual Studio 2010 and ASP.NET 4.0. Now, let's go over this insert image dialog. So we've had this insert image dialog so that, for example, let's say I wanted to use this image. So I can copy that image URL, I can paste it here, and I can put in more options and define exactly how I want it to look. So I can keep the original image size. It's small enough, so I'll leave it. But if I wanted, I can use a custom size and change it so either it's bigger or smaller. But an image this small won't look right if I expanded it. Now, I can also set its position in terms of alignment. So right now I'm fine with left alignment, but I can also right align it. And I can make sure that any text that I write will be written around it. Now this is great if you're using this to write, let's say, a blog or something. And this, we can write here, we can give it a description as well. And this is our ASP.NET logo. And what this is used for the alt text. Now it's very important to define the alt text because that's how search engines and so forth like Google find you. So it's really useful to add always a description of what it is the user is looking at. And not just for search engines, but also for accessibility. So for people with disabilities that are using screen readers, they use that description to figure out what that image might be. So let's just hit insert. So as you can see, it's been right aligned here, and any text that we end up writing will get right aligned from it. So let's say I go here. As you can see, all the text goes around it. Now, there's actually another great feature of the insert image dialog, and that is the ability to serve up images directly from your web server. So let's say there was a set of images that you wanted to show. So let's see how we can do that. So the first thing is we'll take a look at the actual property. So if you click on the the properties of the ASPxHtmlEditor, we'll scroll down. There's the settings image selector property. This is where we can define. So the very first thing you'll notice is that it's not enabled. So we can enable it, and there are some things that we need to set for its folders. For its common settings. But before we do that, we actually have to have images in our web server. So let's add that folder first. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to right-click and add a new folder here. Call it images. And I'm also going to add another folder in here, and I'll call it first. Now this is going to be used as the first folder that I defined. However, I'm going to give the users access to the overall images as well, but this is the first one that I want to start them in. So let's add some images here. So I'm going to right-click on that folder and say Add Existing Item. Now let's simply go and grab some sample images that usually come with Windows. And let's take a couple of these, the desert and the chrysanthemum, and now they're added, and we'll also add a couple to the root folder. So I'll do the same thing with Add Existing Item. Let's add a koala, penguins, and some tulips. Excellent. So now we have images in our web server. So go back to the properties and to the settings image selector. First thing we want to do is enable it. And then, oops, I double-clicked it too many times. And then let's go to the common settings. The first thing you'll notice is this allowed file extensions. Now this is important if you don't want to allow certain file extensions, because this image selector is so powerful that it actually allows your end users to upload their own files, and I'll show that in just a second. So the initial folder is the folder that we want to start off in. However, the root folder is the one where the images are stored. So what we do is to simply define it is we're going to use a relative path here and hit put tilde slash, and it's called images. And the first initial folder was that folder called first that I created. So I'm going to put tilde slash images slash first. Now we have the basics of what we wanted to do, but I also mentioned that they can upload something. So upload, to enable it, you simply click enabled. Oops, demo bug there. Let's go back to the image selector. And we can also allow them to do CRUD type of items with the files on the image selector. So I can allow them to add a new one. Oops. And let's see what's going on here. And delete files as well as move them. So let's just say I'm going to allow deleting. And let's do create as well. And I'll allow renaming as well. Okay, now let's take a look at an action. So now, when we click on the image dialog, one of the new features by clicking that image selector enabled is the feature to browse the items that we've exposed in the images folder. So while that's loading, oops, let's cancel this here. Oops. So the first thing is we want to make sure our cursor is in the editor, and then click Insert Image. And then the Insert Image dialog that comes up. This is the new feature. Now, from this simple browse button, it's hard to tell. Now, if you didn't notice, on the previous one, we didn't have the browse button because we weren't exposed to anything from our web server. So now, when I click Browse, I start off in the first folder. And you can see I have the chrysanthemum and the desert that I've displayed. If I click on Images, it should show the 3 images. Now, what's awesome is that you can see that it creates those thumbnails for us, and because I've enabled the capability, I've allowed them to create their own folders. So if I hit F7 here or click this folder, they'll create a new folder, or if I select an image, I can change its name or delete it. And you'll notice we also have this filter by. Now, this is actually our ASPX file manager that's embedded within the HTML editor. And if you want to learn more about it, I'll put a link in the description of this video, but there's a video that goes into it much deeper than this webinar probably will. So the other item you'll notice is that there's this from computer. Now this allows your end users to upload an item directly from their local computer. So for example, I can click Choose File and say, well, I want to upload this jellyfish, and I can still have the more options that you notice. Now, for this one, I probably want a custom size because I know that's a really large image. So I can go for something like 100 by 100. And I'll leave it left aligned, and I'll simply call it jellyfish. Hit Enter, and you can see it resized it for me and uploaded it and inserted it in there. Now, one of the final things that I didn't cover in the basics yet is these design views. So here, this is the WYSIWYG view. This is the design view. Now you also have the HTML view. So this shows you the full HTML of what will be outputted. So for example, if you were to save that text, this is probably what you'd want to save, the actual HTML. And in the preview mode, this shows you how it will be rendered out into a browser or another HTML-enabled control. Now, one of the most common things you're probably going to want to do is spell checking inside of an editor. And you'll notice that there is no spell checker button here. So let me show you how to enable that. The first thing you want to do is add the button to the toolbar. Now, in previous versions, we actually used to add all the toolbars and so forth. So when you saw those dialogues, those are actually custom controls, and they're fully customizable. And I'll show you how to do that in just a sec. But the reason why we don't create them by default is because now we're using our HTTP handler, because the most common scenarios, people just want to use the HTML editor with the toolbar directly as it is with the standard toolbars. And so there's no need to create them by default. So I'll click Toolbars here from the Smart tag. Now you can also get to it from the Properties menu. Now this toolbar editor, when you want to add or edit any of the standard toolbars, the first thing you want to do is definitely create the default toolbars. And here you can see that the standard toolbar has properties like items and name, invisible, and so forth. The items collection will show you what is actually in those toolbars. So you can see here's all the buttons that I mentioned, the cut, copy, paste, and so forth. And we can even further customize this by adding our own button. So I'm going to just click this, which will add a new custom toolbar button. Now, I'll give it some text like spell check. And I'll give it the same tooltip. Oops. And I want to make sure it's part of the group as well. And I'll just give it a name like spell_check. The command name is useful when you want to filter. So for example, we can write some custom code, which I'll show you in a little bit later on in this webinar, that says if I click this button versus this button, do this custom action. Now, since these are standard buttons, they're already aligned with some action like paste or subscript and indent and so forth. With custom buttons, it's definitely useful if you have more than one. So, actually, let me back up here 1 second. I'm jumping ahead here. So, I actually don't need a custom button. I forget that. So, there are two things here. So, a custom button can be useful if you want to use a particular spell checking that is not supported. However, there are a ton of dictionaries out there, which I'll show you in just a second. We support 4 of the most major ones out there. Because there is already a way to, there's already a button for spell checking, I'm going to use the standard button instead of a custom button. I can use a custom button as I just showed you, but I think it makes more sense in this case to use the standard button. So we're going to go to under dialogues and click check spelling button. Sorry, a little blah 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 there. So, and I'm going to make it part of the group, and you see that it's already got text and a tooltip. Now click OK, and the reason I'm using the standard one is because it's already aligned with an action. Otherwise, I'd probably have to add some custom code, which I'll show a little bit later on how to do, but it's easier if you're just going to use the built-in spell checking mechanism. So I'll click OK here, I'll click OK again, and now I have my little spell checking button that already has an icon and so forth. Now, the next thing you want to do is set up the actual spell checker. So if we go to Settings Spell Checker, and what we want to define is the dictionary here. So right now, there are no dictionaries defined. So, by the way, if you enable that button and there are no dictionaries defined, you'll simply get a little dialog that says no dictionary has been defined. So what we can do here is add a iSpell dictionary, a custom dictionary, a simple dictionary, or even the OpenOffice dictionary. Now, you might be wondering, well, where do I find those dictionaries? How do I download them? Well, the easiest way is to just Google them. But to make it a little bit easier, if you go to the demos of the HTML editor and click on spell checking and scroll down, you'll see that we've linked to a couple of them. For example, iSpell and OpenOffice, which I'll open in background tags here. Now, for some reason, iSpell is a little bit more difficult to find. But if you just Google it a little bit, you will find there's plenty of them out there. So you can download one of these iSpell dictionaries, or you can go and get the OpenOffice version. So I find that it's actually a little bit easier to just say OpenOffice dictionary. And the first link to this wiki is usually the easiest one to grab. Now, what's great is that they're available in all different languages and cultures and so forth. So, for example, I can click on English here and download the English United States version. Now, another option is that you can use the dictionary if you're using English. Now, for this demo, we have provided a specific dictionary. So if you go to DevExpress, if you go to your public documents, under DevExpress 2010.2 demos, components, ASP.NET, HTMLEditor, CS, HTML demos, and I believe it's under app data, you'll see this dictionaries folder. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these dictionaries. Here, let me just show you in there. In it, we have a few items like the American English Dictionary. This is for the grammar checking. And you'll notice that we can also define the actual alphabet so that when the dictionary is checking, it checks to see that the characters inputted are actually within the alphabet. So I actually want to take all of that. I'll copy that folder, and I'll go to my projects and add it to this demo. So I'm simply going to right-click here, paste it, and then we'll include it in our project. So here it's in the actual location, but it's not recognized yet by Visual Studio. So let me go and do that first. So I'll cancel that dialog, click Solution Explorer. Now in Visual Studio, there are hidden folders and files. And the way to see them is when you're in the Solution Explorer, click this Show All Files button. And now I can see there's my dictionary. I'll right-click that and include it in my project so that the project now recognizes that these items will be available for those other dialogues. I'll hide those hidden files again. Go back to the Settings Spell Checker, the Dictionary dialog, and this is an iSpell dictionary. So I'm going to click on iSpell and create an iSpell dictionary item. And now I can go and actually define these items. So here, the alphabet path is here in the English alphabet. Now, if we take a look, you'll notice that most of these items in the dictionary are just simple text file items. So for example, here, the grammar item stuff. Now, there is a particular format to these things, and I'd recommend reading the actual particular dictionary type to learn more about them. All right. Now, let's go define. It's also important to define the culture. And in this case, we're using English, so that would be en-us. Oops, not es. En. And the dictionary path is the actual dictionary. Now, I do have to warn you, dictionaries can be named different things. For example, the OpenOffice format uses the .dic extension, and in this case, this one uses the XLG extension. Now, the encoding name depends on what part of the region you're in. So, for example, me, I am in the Western European Windows, and the grammar is defined in the English.aaf. Now, click OK. Now let's see this in action. Now while that's loading, let's close these out and get ready to look at custom dialogues next. Okay, so let's say you're typing away and say this is a spelling mistake. And you'll notice that the first thing that happened right away is that it recognized spelling was a mistake. Oh, let me finish typing the mistake here, sorry. And it underlined it in red. Now, what I can do here is I can click the check spelling, which will go and check, let's say if we had multiple versions of this, it'll highlight all of the mistakes. And when I begin to check the spelling, it's going to go and find all those misspelled items. And the very first thing it did says, okay, well, here's what I found is a spelling mistake. And based on the dictionary, here's what I think the word could be. It could be spewing, could be spling, and spelling. So obviously we want the third one. And I can't really say the second one for some reason. And if I select the second one, now I can change the individual one, but I know I have it more than once. So what I want to do is I'm just going to say change it all. Now, obviously, if you've used Word, you notice that you have these other items too, such as ignore once, ignore all, or if I left a word in, like this, I can add it to the dictionary if it doesn't already exist in the dictionary. So I'll leave it to spelling and click change all, and it's complete because now we've passed the test. We've fixed all the mistakes. So that in a nutshell is spell checking. So now let's take a look at some of the custom design time stuff. Okay, so before we do that, let me show you one quick thing. You may be wondering how to data bind this. It's really fairly straightforward. As I mentioned, there is a HTML property to this, and that's really all you need access to here. Now, if, for example, you wanted to embed this into something else, there's a great example, which also, as I mentioned, I'll link to this. Let's say you want to put this in the HTML ASPX grid view and use this as an editor for some rich HTML edit. So, for example, here, as you can see, I've got some HTML embedded for this description HTML field. So when I click edit, I don't want to just use the standard memo field. What I want to do is I want to use the HTML editor. And in this demo, it shows you how to do that. So this actually uses the HTML editor and grabs this item. So if you're wondering how it grabs it, it's actually really simple. But you have the full HTML editor here, so we can go on and say something like, this is a test, and we'll click update. Now, because this is an online demo, we won't allow you to update, since anybody out on the internet can change something. But if we did, you'd see this updated back into the grid view here. Now, but by the way, that's a common thing for all our Code Central demos. And this Code Central demo, as I mentioned, can be downloaded locally. So for example, if I hit download example, I can open this right in my Visual Studio. But what I want to show here is that there's something very simple going on here. So in the ASPX grid view, we're changing the edit form template, and we're just using the HTML editor. And all we're doing is setting its HTML property and calling the eval. So this eval description HTML field is grabbed for the edit form. So when the edit form is in there, it's evaluating what that description HTML field is. So really, that's all you really need to do to get any items from the your database and put them in the HTML editor. So as I mentioned, I'll link back to that in the demo a little bit later. Now, as I mentioned, there's a ton of custom things we can do here. For example, anything that you see in the HTML editor that you're not happy with, you can customize it. As I mentioned, custom toolbars, you can customize the CSS, and we have demos of all of this. And so, for example, here we have a custom CSS file that we're using to define some of the styles that are being used in here. So, for example, however, let's say if this was a header 1 tag, we want to say that every time I want to make sure it's all in blue or a certain color of blue, and it's bolded and so forth. So we can define all of those styles. Now, if you ever want to take a look at any of the code behind for this, simply click on this code tab up here, and you can see all the different files used for this demo. So, for example, here you can see the custom CSS, and you can see that we've got some custom headers and common headers and so forth that we're defining the styles for just for this demo. Now, the dialogues are also a very powerful feature. Now, I'm rushing a little bit because I want to show you the custom toolbars. I won't have time to show you the custom CSS and custom dialogues, but there are videos on this on our TV site, which I will be sure to link to. So, the custom dialogues, as I mentioned, allows you to create your own dialogues. As you saw, there were dialogues for the insert images, insert link, and so forth. Well, you can create your own version of that dialogue. So if we go back here, and here in this demo, what we've done is using this toolbar button, when you click on it, invokes a special dialogue. Now you might be wondering, how is it created? What exactly is done? So all this really is a custom control, and you simply define that with a few items. And if you take a look at the code here, you can see that there's a insert template form that we're using, and the action for what that form does is defined in this insert form template.js. Now, every demo that you see on our online site is also installed locally, so you can open them up, play with them. So let's take a look at how that dialogue is exactly created. Now, I won't get into the complete details, but you can kind of see how to create one for yourself. So let's just open the file directly. So I go back and take a look at public documents, demos. I'm going down to where the DevExpress demos are installed, which is in public documents, components, ASP.NET, HTML editor, CS, HTML editor, and I believe it's in features. Yes. So in the features, there's this insert template form. And you might be wondering, well, how do I know it's insert template form? Well, when I was looking at this here, you can see that the form is coming from this insert template form, and as you know, an ASCX is a user control, and that's what most of these dialogues are. They're simply user control. So if we open this user control and see what's in it, now let's just take the design view. You'll see that it's a rendering of what's in the actual dialogue, and that's all you have to do. So once you actually define this, you can simply point to that form path. And if you've also defined the JavaScript actions for it, then it's very easy enough to simply get your own custom actions in dialogue. All right, so Visual Studio is taking this little time to render that. I will. Aha. Okay. So here, there are a few things here. First is we have a loading panel, a grid view, and XML data source. So the XML data source we're using because whenever you click this custom dialog, we're inserting some specific HTML text, which is defined in a custom XML file. Now, the actual JavaScript, as I mentioned, is in that JS file. So just to show you this user control, you can define anything for your own dialog yourself. My recommendation is to keep it small because this is a dialog, so you wouldn't want to have a full long page of something because then your dialog will be huge. Now let's take a look at custom toolbars. The custom toolbars are actually also very easy to define. So as I mentioned before, you can go and simply go to the properties. So let's go to the properties this time instead of the smart tag. So if I go to the toolbars collection here, you can see that here's the two standard toolbars we created. Now I want to create a custom toolbar. Now the table toolbar pertains to that table properties, but what I want is a custom toolbar. So now I can have a custom toolbar here. I'll just call this my toolbar. And we'll define a couple of items in its collection. Now, the first thing I want to define is no, I have the toolbar. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can add really two types of items to the toolbar. The drop-downs, and from the drop-downs you have three choices: a combo box, an item picker, or a menu, or a button. Now, I'm going to choose a button, and I'm actually going to need two of them, so I'll add another custom button. So the first one, I'll give it a name and call it delete all. Now, I'll explain what it's going to do. So the command name will be delete_all because I'm going to filter by that. And then the text will be delete all. Now, you can have a tooltip as well. Let's add that. And I'll set the begin group to true. Now the second toolbar button, I'm going to be calling add template. And I'll set its text to add mail template. Now these are a couple of common scenarios that have been asked in our forums, so we made a little thing in our documentation. So our documentation also explains this too. So now I'll set the click OK, and as you can see, I've got a custom toolbar here and added those two items. So I'll click OK. Now I have toolbar button items, but they don't do anything. We've simply defined the buttons. We actually need to code some actions against them. So what we do is the ASPxHtmlEditor provides several several client-side events as well as functionality. So let's set a couple of properties. The first thing is we're going to go and we'll just give it a client instance name. We'll call this HTML or CHTML editor. Now, I can get to the client-side events directly from here by clicking this, or I can go to the smart tag as well. Now, you can see you got several client-side events you can hook into and do something with. The one we want is custom command. Because these are custom buttons, this is where we're going to actually catch and figure out what action we're going to take based on that item. So, as I mentioned here, add mail template sounds like we're going to be using some kind of template. So, whenever I send out emails, you may see something from me that says, hey, thank you for choosing us, and let me know if I can help in any other way. And I type hundreds of those a day, so it would be really hard for me to type that all the time. So I use what's called a template. So I'm going to define that template here. So I'll create a little parameter and call it mail message template. And it's simply just some string. So if you'll notice that I'll start a new paragraph, I'll say hi, and I'll leave the actual name empty. Close the paragraph, do a break return, and say thanks. Now, because this is a template, I want to leave it blank. So now do another break return. and put in the Developer Express Incorporated sign and close the string. So now I have the string that I can use to put in there whenever add mail template is clicked. So let's now define how we're going to catch those items. We're going to use a switch statement. Now, the actual command name is passed in. So here we have the sender and the event args. So if in the event args is the actual item. So you may be wondering, how do I know that this is the custom command? So, the best way is to look in help. Now, a lot of times people think, oh, well, for example, I know so much. I use help a lot. And the best way to get at it is just go to search.devexpress.com, and I'll show you how this search engine is fantastic. Now I can search for everything, but if I go particularly down to a product and I type in something like custom command, so I can figure out what that custom command does, I'll put in the exact name and I'll hit search, and the very first item it returns is exactly the event I was looking for, which is the client-side object, which is the ASPX client HTML editor custom command. Now if I click on it, it should show me its parameters. Now you'll see that it took me directly to it, and if you want to learn more, most of the client-side events are inside of the product, and if you go to its namespace under scripts, you'll find a client-side object as well as its events and its other members and so forth. So under custom command, we can see that it gives a couple of items in the event args here. A command name, which gets the name of the process command, and a parameter. What we want is a command name. Now this is the name that we defined, which was delete_all and add_template. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch on that command name. So I'm going to say e.command name. Oops. Be sure you use the exact name. So here it's command lowercase c and uppercase n, and just to verify that, go back and check here. Now the reason this is important because this is JavaScript, and JavaScript is a great functional language, but it does not allow you to easily tell. So you're not going to be able to tell at development time that if you have an error or not. It may occur at runtime. So it's always better to double check. Now, so the first case we're going to check for is if it's calling delete all. So I'll say delete all, and if it is delete all, then I'm simply going to call the client-side event, which is setHTML. Now, the ASPxHtmlEditor gives you a couple of great events, getHTML and setHTML. You're probably going to be using this quite a bit. Now, you notice here I'm using S. This is the sender. The sender is the HTML editor because that's the client-side event that we're defining for. So what I'm saying is, hey, set the HTML editor for the sender, which I know for sure is the ASPxHTML editor. Now, if I wanted to get the HTML, I can use the getHTML method. But in this case, I simply need the setHTML. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set when I call setHTML, what it basically does is takes whatever is in the HTML defined for the ASPxHTML editor and replace it. And that's what we're going to do, since that's what delete all says. And we're simply going to replace it with a non-breaking space. Now, once we've set that, call break to break out of that case statement. And now let's code the final one, which is the add_template. And here we're going to do the same thing. We're going to call set HTML. And here I'm simply going to pass it this mail message template. And the reason is because we've already defined what we want to set the HTML to. So here's the HTML we want to set it to. So we're simply going to pass that variable in there. Now we'll break out of the statement again, and we're simply going to close the switch statement. Click OK. Now let's see this in action here. Now, Amanda, I know we're getting dangerously close to the 1 hour mark, so I am almost done. Now,
okay.
Here, let's enter in some text. Now, if I hit delete all, what it did was it reset the HTML, and if we look at the actual HTML view here, oops, we should see our, for some reason we don't see the non-breaking space. By the way, let me, one quick thing I forgot to mention is we usually start off in the design view, but if you'd rather, you can start off in the HTML view. And there's a simple way to do that, and that's to set the active view property of the HTML designer. So I can go HTML or preview. Design works the best though. So let's take a look at the other custom button here. So let's say I'm going to send a message. When I click Add Mail Template, now I can go, hi Amanda, we're almost done. Woohoo! And I said, nah, that's not what I want to type. Then I hit delete all. So anyways, you can see that it's very customizable. It's very extensible. I just showed you the toolbars. However, dialogues are customizable. And another great item that we added was this validation feature. This feature allows you to both on the server side or the client side define, let's say, a minimum length or check for even the text that was entered inside or the HTML that was entered inside here. So for example, this one checks that the length is of a certain limit. And if it goes over that limit, you can display a custom message that says your validation failed because it exceeds 50 characters. Now, I should also mention that the ASPxHtmlEditor, because it's an HTML editor, also does HTML validation. And it does this right on the fly. Now, as I mentioned before, I highly, highly recommend, in fact, let me do that. Let me first just go to help.devexpress.com. Now, this is where you'll find documentation for all of our products. So if I go to ASP.NET Products, HTML Editor, here, I recommend just going through many of these topics here. For example, product information, which goes everything into demos, how to install the demos, the features, how to deploy it, what one-time DLLs you'll need. In fact, you can also go into the getting started. The concepts explains all of the items. For example, what the user interface looks like, what the dialog items are called, the context menus, and so forth. Let's get into, I believe it is under, okay, so under working with content, under the concepts is HTML validation. Now this is not the validation that we saw in the demo. That validation means it's a custom validation. This is the actual HTML that's validated. Because we're XHTML 1.0 transitional compliant, that means we work across all the browsers. That's what the ASPxHtmlEditor does. And what exactly it does is things like correct tag names, lowercase, invalid. You can see all the things it does by going and viewing this topic in the help documentation. Now, I will open the floor to questions. I think we're done.
Okay. Okay, well, so we've been answering a lot of questions here on the back end, but there's some that I think maybe you should address live. Monica's asking, I was working with the ASPxHtmlEditor today, and I had a problem with validation. I set a validation group on the HTML editor, and then the same validation group also on a button. Unless I specifically add HTML editor control.validate in the button's click event handler before saving the data, the editor is not validated. Shouldn't it validate automatically if the button and the editor has the same validation group?
That's a little tough to answer. You know, Monica, if you don't mind, can you submit that question to our support team, please, so that we can dig into it a little bit?
Okay, I sent her your email and support just to send a sample of what she's dealing with to look at, but I didn't know if maybe you could. Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, you know, I mean, it sounds like the answer is probably like what she's doing with the validator might be correct, you know, but you know, Monica, I also recommend taking a look at the validation example here. That can help you quite a bit. As I said, there's a server-side example of the validation as well as a client-side example of the validation. So, what else do we have?
We've had kind of a thing going back and forth with Mike about the lack of a save button on the toolbar. He's looking to save HTML contents to a file.
Ah, okay. Well, so that's a custom button, right? So you can create a custom button and define that. Now, what does he mean? Save it to a file on the server or on the web server, or save it to a database? I mean, well, either way, it
Um,
doesn't matter because he can handle that, right? So, for example, so this was the example I was just showing, the custom toolbars. This one's a little bit different, but if you look at the code, whenever you handle the custom toolbar, you can do perform callback. So if I had done a perform callback, I can handle the server-side data event for custom data callback. So,
hey, Mehul, just so
it,
you know, he said on a server is what he's
oh, okay,
looking to
yeah.
save.
Okay, yeah. Either way, yeah. So what would basically happen is you would call the, let's see if I can show you, client-side event, custom button. So let's say we had another button, we'd add a case statement, and then we do something like, s dot perform callback. Uh, You know what? Tell them to contact me via email, and then we'll follow up because I think it's a little bit of a deeper conversation, and maybe there's even an example or something we can show them.
Um, okay, I just sent him your email. Let's see. Don is asking if you could show how to use the standard edit/insert link dialog where we change the ASPX text box into an ASPX link button, if it's not too much work.
Let's see. So the custom dialogues. So I th- I think I'm not exactly sure, but I think what we may have to do is replace one of those other dialogues. Now, we used to simply output those dialogues. Oh, I see. Okay, so you want to change the standard dialogue, huh? Okay, that may be a little tough. Uh, we used to put them out. Now they actually served up directly. I'm not sure if it's entirely possible to change the default one, but what you can do is, if you, as you saw, you can create your own, right? And as you saw, you can modify the standard toolbar. So what you can do is even replace the one that's called here. So this is a standard toolbar button, right? Okay, so for example, let's see. Okay. So let's say we're going to copy the default dialog forms to the project, right? Here, the action will copy the default dialog forms, blah, 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 to the web project, make them available. And so what we want to do is those default dialogs now will be copied over. So it is possible, Don. Here, let's click the yes again. And as you can see, there's a bunch of things being added here, and they're user controls. Now, these are the actual controls. Now, I don't recommend doing this unless you need to, but now, as you can see, so let's see here. Here's the insert link form, and here you can go and customize it. So, answer, Don, yes. You got your standard link form, the standard dialog. It's editable, and do with what you want.
He says,
No,
sweet.
awesome.
Let's see. Sorry, let's see where we were.
Oh, I
Are
see.
there,
Crispin. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yes. Are there any
Let me just
issues with
answer
jQuery? Sure.
Crispin's question real quick, Amanda. Sorry. You know what? This probably this week or early next week, uh, MVC3 is out. We've been looking at it since beta, and we support it. And the ASPxHtmlEditor, like the HTML editor for the MVC, will support it. So the answer is yes.
Are you answering the Razor View Engine version?
Yes, I'm sorry. Razor. If anybody doesn't know, the Razor View Engine is a new view engine in ASP.NET MVC3.
Cool. Crispin had an earlier question about jQuery. Are there any issues with jQuery and the custom event handling?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean. I mean, can you be a little more specific? For us, let's say no, right? I mean, what you see in terms of like when I defined the, let's go back here. When I defined the client-side event, I have a client instance name. So the ASPX HTML editor, like most of our ASP.NET controls, have their own client-side events and items and so forth, right? Now, if you want to do something special with jQuery, contact us, let us know what it is you're trying to do, and we'll let you know, perhaps, if there's an easier way or if it's even necessary. But, there's no, let's say, there's no problem with using jQuery, right? You can use jQuery to access DOM elements and so forth. And I believe there's maybe one or two. Here, let's see. The best way is to check search. And jQuery. I don't know if there's any examples in Code Central, but let's just do a quick search. I believe there may be some with ASPX Grid View. Okay, so let's just check in general. But yes, to answer this question, there is no problem. Yeah, so there are some Code Central examples that show you with the ASPX Grid View, MVC menu, and the extra chart suite.
Great. That is all of our questions.
Wow. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well,
we had a few that were answered by our support team during the webinar. So.
Yeah, and those guys are like a billion times more than I am. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so Crispin says thanks for the jQuery answer. All right.
Thank you, Crispin.
Well, thank you, Mehul, for a very informative webinar. Thanks to our support team, too, and thank you all for being here. I just wanted to let you all know that we have 2 more webinars this week. Tomorrow we have business letters and mail merge with rich text edit. In this webinar, we'll learn how to work with rich text editor's mail merge features. We'll go over fields, tables, data binding, and everything else we need to design and email custom business letters with Azrit Botash. And our final webinar of this week, creating your own financial indicators with ASP.NET, a walkthrough on how to create a new custom indicator and add it to its own pane with charting evangelist Brian Wood. And just a quick peek into next week. Next Monday, Mehul is back with the ASP.NET team to answer all your questions regarding the ASP.NET platform and MVC products with our Ask DevExpress series. That is this coming Monday, I think, what, January 24th? And then Tuesday, DevExpress welcomes Andrew Connell, SharePoint MVP, as he presents an introduction to SharePoint 2010 for developers. If you've ever wanted to jump on the SharePoint 2010 bandwagon, this is the session for you. Here you'll learn about the various options you have in standing up a SharePoint development environment. Then we'll explore the developer tools and build a container to store some data with a content type, list template, and list instance. Finally, you'll learn the best places to get information and help going forward from books, classes, and online forums. We have a full lineup of webinars currently scheduled through March. Check them out at www.devexpress.com/webinars. And again, if you missed anything from this webinar or you want to review previous webinars or watch hundreds of DevExpress product tutorials, visit us on the DevExpress channel at tv.devexpress.com. Again, thank you so much, Mehul. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for choosing DevExpress.